is interesting. This is an experiment. I'm going to see how it does it. If it like just gives it to me as if it gives me 2 recordings or not. So, so we should just move on to book club, because we're here. And Wuju, you're welcome to listen through book club, or you can say goodbye as well. Our feelings won't be hurt. But yeah, so here we are, one of the greatest texts ever written. Can I see which copies you guys have so I know? Bloom. You have the Bloom?
I also have the R.E. Allen.
Okay.
I have it with me.
And I can't find but I do have the Bloom. Otherwise I use some like classics online free edition.
Yeah, there's lots. This is I have many copies of the Republic, but I used the Loeb edition because it has the Greek on one side and the Paul Shorey translation on the other side. I also have the one that's just Greek. I have the Plotinus opera, which so does Roger. But yeah, the translation is fine, I think, on this one. I also have a really interesting treatment by Ellen Badiou, where he's like changed the name of not all of the characters, but Adamantis is like Adamanta. He makes a female character in there, but like why that, what it's, anyway.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I have some problems with the Badiou treatment, but it is also funny at certain places. I think I want to do my own treatment though. Sophie and I were talking about it because it's actually really funny, and just the whole theatricality of this should be a play. It is a play.
I was surprised how like cute and lightweight, like lighthearted a lot of it was.
Right?
Like when he talks about, Socrates is talking about the wonderful amount of sweat that the other guy was having, and yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I was also picking up on like some campiness, or like if you were going to like rewrite this for Netflix or the theater, that you would totally have to have Socrates be fully campy. And so Sophia thought of casting her uncle, who is an actor and who is campy. She's like, it would be the role of his lifetime. Maybe we will do it. But yeah, so let's just go through book one. There's 10 books. We could just go book by book now, reading how rich. We should not do more than one book at a time. We have time, and they are very rich and fun. So and I will say too, since I read Greek, if you want to know what a word in your translate, if you think it's important to know the Greek word for something, you can just ask me what word is used for this, because in Greek the words can have multiple meanings, and also the translation doesn't end up fully revealing the importance of the word that is used in Greek for English speaking, right? So when they're talking about rulers, they're talking about archontes, which comes from the word arche, which means beginning or first principle. And we have a lot of things that are the arch whatever. And that etymology is really important for the language that we do speak. When we think of any word like archaeology, or any word that begins with that ARCH prefix, comes from this word for to rule in Greek. So there are some key words. Interestingly, the word for justice is Latin, justitia, and it's a far different word in Greek, which is dike, or dikaiosune, which is they actually are used interchangeably, but I'm sure there are a lot of texts about what is the difference when Plato was writing dike versus dikaiosune. And it's probably dikaiosune is justice, and to be dikos is to be just, which would be the adjectival form. The other thing that's really interesting is the alpha privative. Roger, would you like to explain what the alpha privative is? Do you remember what it is?
Yeah, well, it's a privative will make things the opposite. So adicane, right, would be in unjust.
Right. So the negative, that in order to make a word negative, they add an A at the beginning. Alpha is the letter A. And so a just man is a dikos, a just guy. And an unjust man is an adikos. So just to remember, there are a lot of alpha primitives throughout the text, because that's going to be the role of anantios, the opposites, pitting one thing, the like versus the unlike, off of one another, in Socrates's Elenchus, or Elenchi, as the case may be. So it starts off with, there are a few like really epic beginnings to Greek texts, and probably it's this one and the Odyssey, right? Where the beginning of the Odyssey is Mainen Ide Thea, sing goddess. And this one is Katebain Kthes es Piraea. I went down yesterday to the Piraeus. And so it's also an interesting text because Socrates is speaking in the first person. So we already have to like trust Socrates and his narrative of the events, which is,
Questionable.
questionable. Yeah. I have so much more. We can dissect this, but I have so much more compassion for Thrasymachus now, where before I was like, oh, the Thrasymachai of the world are just ruining everything. He's so much like Donald Trump and da 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 da. And we can see that, of course, with the parallels. But I actually have Socrates is a fucker.
Yes. Yes. He's like, every time, like he makes someone a certain opinion, and then he like talks circles around it, and then he like makes them assert another opinion, already knowing he's going to talk circles around it.
And then he's like, well, you're saying you know the thing. I'm just saying I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, well, you clearly know something because you're
Yeah,
aiming at
yeah.
something. Well,
Yeah.
and then he's gonna say, what I know is I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, he'd be annoying in real life. Like there's no question.
Oh, he'd be so annoying. Yeah.
Like I enjoy reading this, being there, not so much.
So let's just go through what, so there, yesterday he, in the first person, he goes down to the Piraeus. Socrates doesn't leave Athens that much. So it is kind of a big deal that he's left the city walls. The only other text of Plato's where Socrates goes outside of the city walls is the Phaedrus. And there's this whole thing with the cicadas and the plane tree, and he's kind of off his guard, being outside. So every time Socrates is outside the city, he is not protected by the city walls. He's a little bit more vulnerable when he leaves Athens. And ostensibly in his past too, he did some military campaigns because he is an Athenian citizen, and all of the male citizens have to engage in military. And that's also something worth discussing too, is just the way, like, they're just like friends and enemies, right? And so that's a concept that is definitely not thoroughly fleshed out. How that, like, you just have friends and enemies, that's just how it is. But I think that is actually something Socrates is driving at, which is how it's not actually that easy to distinguish between a friend and an enemy, and like how these alliances are formed, how they are sustained, and how they are broken, and like whether anything is pure, let's say. So he went to the Piraeus with Glaucon, the son of Ariston, and the goddess is Bendis. It's like a relatively new goddess. That's also the metaphysics of gods and goddesses in this is, you know, also interesting. Like there's no real questioning of the existence of gods and goddesses. And so they go down there and it's like a new thing. They're like, oh, we're just gonna check out this new thing. Heard that there's a really big deal. The Thracians are gonna be marching. And they did some prayers and ablutions and, you know, participated. And then they're like, all right, we did the thing. Let's go home. And then Polymarchus comes up and is like, oh, not so fast. They were hastening homeward, it says in my translation. Porothin, Hemos, Oikaide, Hormemenus, Polymarchus, Hokephalon. So Polymarchus, son of Cephalus, the old dude with the big house, and he sends his servant to catch up to Socrates and Glaucon, and is like, guys, wait, stay. He caught his hemation, his robe, and then who is it? So it's Polymarchus has a group of dudes with him, Adamantus, who's Glaucon's brother, Niceratus, the son of Nicias, and there are going to be other guys at the house there too. So there's Polymarchus, Adamantus, and Niceratus. So it's 3 against 2 at that point. And Socrates like, I want to go home. I'm grumpy. And they're like, no, we want you to come to our dad's house. We want you to come to Polymarchus's dad's house. Like, come talk to us. And everybody loves talking to Socrates. And this is also a theme throughout the Platonic dialogues, is Socrates being like, this is where the campy part, this could be campy. He's like this old queen that's like, oh no, I'm being accosted by young boys. Please don't take me. Please don't take me. And they're like, he's like, I
Yeah,
swear,
totally.
you're the ones that like me. And they do like him. And they're like, come on, Socrates, you're going to come down. Like, it's like, oh no, I've got things to do. And so he's being accosted by 3 young dudes to come and party. And this part is just so there's some zingers where but you see how many we are. Surely you must either then prove yourselves the better men or stay here. So they're like, you're gonna have to fight us. Like, we're actually not gonna let you leave. Why is there not left, said I, the alternative of our persuading you that you ought to let us go? So like already we have this issue in the beginning about justice, about and friends and force and friends versus enemies. And really, you know, right from the beginning, Socrates left his happy place of Athens and he is vulnerable, and he basically gets attacked, surrounded by young men, and who are like, you're gonna have to fight us to leave. And then
So that, Dan, that like wasn't in jest. Like when I first started it, I was like, oh, this is a threatening situation. And then when I saw where it went, I was like, oh, they were like, no, you have to come over. Like I thought it was more in jest, but
I think it is in jest, but it also it's I mean it just kind of points towards Thrasymachus's argument.
yeah, I mean, I think it's both. There's no reason. I mean, it's a military culture. It's a very male-centered culture too. So like them joking that they're going to kick his ass.
okay.
You know, and it does foreshadow Thrasymachus' argument, because they say, but could you persuade us? Well, we won't listen.
Right.
So how can you persuade somebody who's not even going to listen? Like they're basically saying there's no argument you could make. You're coming to my dad's house.
Which is sort of what Thrasymachus does in the end, because he just refuses to debate Socrates anymore. He's just like, okay, if you say so, okay, if you say so.
Totally. Which I want to talk more about that, because it's a touchy situation, where how do you argue, like, what is Socrates driving at? Does he just want the conversation to continue for the sake of continuing the conversation? Does Socrates want to be right? Like, what is he going to get out of persuading Thrasymachus to his side? It's a very valuable question to ask. Like, what is the telos? Is there a telos to Socrates's argument? What is he driving at? Does he want everybody to be in Socratic aporia? Is there a therapy to that, like a political therapy to more of us being confused about what things are? Or is it the case that we are going to have to be blind to certain things and reject certain aporias in order to have some certainty, even though, like, we might suspect that it's unstable? And I think this is, like, the whole time I reading this with a group of people who surf, I keep thinking of this whole crowds issue, and then just all of the issues that we have vis-a-vis justice in the water, of like who burned who back paddled who deserves more waves than who should get, how we take turns, why we take turns, who governs turn taking. Because, and then I'm also reminded of just how put out people are when they're like, oh, that person took my wave, I wish ill upon them. And how we go so quickly to those kinds of statements and opinions and feelings. And how, like I wrote in the newsletters, like, this is not like, are you so sure you have the moral upper hand in these cases? And what makes you sure? I'm not. There are moments when I'm surer than others. And that is also what has given me some compassion to Thrasymachus a little bit. Just about, I was just thinking, like, the stronger surfer gets the more waves. Of course, they can actually physically take them. Like, how does it? But to Socrates's point, it's neither of them are all right, I think, but maybe Socrates, I think I side with a little bit more at the end of the day, because it's not that it's also this, it's not this one-to-one relationship of the stronger person is doing the ruling necessarily. But if we take this idea of fulfilling a virtue, that, like, to do something optimally, like the eyes seeing better, if your eyes don't see very well, you get a handicap device so the eyes can do their thing better. If it is the unfortunate case in which you cannot see because you are blind, the other senses are going to, like, up the virtue meter on what they're good at to make up for losing the other sense. So, like, if each techne, that's what the arts are, that's the Greek in the text, if each skill has a virtue, like doing that skill, and we'll bring in the money making later, because that is so interesting too, that he pulls that in there. If each skill has a virtue, and the virtue of surfing is surfing well, and that looks like surfing gracefully, catching the wave, like at its logical start, riding it to its logical conclusion in a teleological complete manner. But we would also have to agree on that value. So let's just say that's the value. Then the stronger surfer is going to be setting the tone or the examples of what that looks like. So it's going to be setting the scale of value. And so that person is in a way ruling the lineup by their example. So that places, like Socrates is saying, a greater weight upon them to comport themselves in such a way that sets this tone for what it could be like out there. So if other people can't surf that virtuously, then just by nature of seeing a virtuous surfing example, they can see that it's possible to surf that virtuously, which that person is doing a good for the whole entire lineup. It doesn't mean they're a good person, which I'm always harping on about. I mean, I don't think anybody is a good person like all the way, but like Socrates's point is that you could be better and worse. And it like this person could use that skill and that virtue to literally take everything from the weaker people around them just because they're weaker, and he or she could just paddle around them, take them away. And that is going to make them not see the virtue in their surfing as clearly, as it's going to be clouded by resentment at having what feels like some possibility of optimizing their own practice taken away from them.
Mm.
So, but at the same time, if the virtuous surfer gives too many good waves away, errs on the other side of altruism, and those people fall all of the time and no good surfing happens, and then people only have examples of failures of the practice, then that's not helping either. So what we're looking for is some kind of middle ground where the virtuous surfer is taking where people are realizing some type of like difference in our levels of virtuosity, but also our humanness in that we're all endeavoring to get better at something. And this is, again, this is like an optimal situation, because I think what we're coming up against is that like mostly the world we experience is non-optimal situations. And so one of the things that always crops up in any kind of discourse on justice is just our desire for this optimization, and for placing our view of the best way to optimize upon other people, and when we need to back off versus, and you know, Socrates has developed a very interesting way of like not backing off.
Socrates is devil's advocate guy. Like the guy
Yeah.
who's always like, but let's just play devil's advocate here.
So I just went on this thing about surf. So I want to keep surfing in mind, but then also, so setting the scene, right? They're at this festival party. Socrates wants to go home. He's tired. All these guys are like, you got to come to my dad's house and have this conversation. So they get him to go. They go to Cephalus's house. Cephalus means head in Greek. And all of the names like means something. That the Greek names have some type of etymology that actually corresponds to a phenomenon in the world. At any rate, so they go there, and what happens next?
Socrates starts asking Cephalus about his age and
Yeah, he's
what
like,
it's like
"What's
to
it
be old.
dude?"
Which is actually something I think about all the time, but would never ask. Like, I always want to know, what does it feel like to be 80 and know that you're so close to the end of life?
Yeah, and I think that's appropriate. I think that Socrates is probably in his 50s. At 50s, maybe early 60s, maybe 50s. Socrates either late 40s or somewhere in the 50s, and Cephalus is probably more in that 70s and way more towards the end of life. And then the other people are probably more in their like late 20s, 30s range. Maybe there's some early 40-year-olds there. But yeah, I would say that's probably like they are politically active male citizens of Athens. And so they went to Polymarchus's house, and it was a big old sausage fest. Not only is now we have Socrates, Glaucon, Polymarchus, Nicias, Niceratus, 5. Then we have Lysias, Euthydemus, who are Polymarchus's brothers, Thrasymachus, Charmantides, and Cleitophon, and Cephalus. So 11 people. 11 people hanging out at this house. And Socrates like, damn, Polemarchus got old. I haven't seen you in a long time, dude. You're old. And what's that like? And he says that Socrates doesn't come down to the Piraeus that often. And neither does Cephalus go to town. Everybody's getting set in their ways. They're like, you moved to Rockaway, I never see you anymore.
Accurate.
Accurate, totally. And then he said, you know, what's the first thing Cephalus says? It's like, I'm not nearly as horny anymore. It's so awesome.
I'm at peace.
Yeah, he's like, that was a wicked master. Really glad to be done with that. Feels great. A lot calmer. And then they start to talk about being scared of dying. Then they start to talk about finitude, basically. So that is how we arrive at the question of justice, because Cephalus is basically like, you know, I kind of do start thinking like about hell. And this is the hell that he is
Right.
talking about. This is actually the hell that the Christians will adopt from the Greeks. So there is, you know, the Greeks invented that
Oh.
Western trope of hell, where there is symbolic retribution in another life. That's like, you know, very symbolic of the, you know, that's where like Dante's Inferno is a mixture of, it's the moral tone is set by Christian values, and the punishments and the imagery is set by the classical world in Dante. So like adultery is not as big of a deal for the Greeks. There's not like they're not worried as much about adultery, it doesn't seem like, in terms of like a specific retributive punishment, but like wife stealing. Like,
They're very concerned with who owes what.
yes, they're very concerned with who owes what, and having debts and debts paid off, and what you do with your resources. And Socrates is basically asking Cephalus, like, do you think it would be possible for you to have this much peace with yourself and be okay going into old age if you didn't also have money? Would you have had to make more compromises that would make you feel more indebted? Like if you were more in debt, would you feel worse about your situation? And I mean, it's weird because like, okay, Plato was a rich guy. And Socrates always professes to never have any money, you know, like this is the whole issue with sophistry, right? So there is Socrates, here's he's a little bit of a purist in the sense that like he wants the education to be free. He doesn't want to charge for educating because he thinks that it's just bettering everybody, and that like he doesn't want to buy his own argument where he clearly does have opinions and stances. And one of his strong stances is that he gets joy from other people unlocking their potential, and it's enough for him and fulfilling for him that they unlock their potential for knowledge. Even if it is, and to unlock their potential for knowledge is to crack open the door that says, whoa, there's so much I still don't know. There's a lot of things that I can know, like geometry, but like if I keep pressing, I'm not going to get to ultimate knowledge. I'm going to have to keep pressing, because that's what Socrates does. He's in the practice of keeping pressing, not for the purpose of arriving, for the purpose of this intercourse.
Infinite game.
the infinite
a-
game, the infinite brain sex. And so that he's always on about that, and if he were to enjoy making money for it, then he would be doing it for a less pure purpose. And so the sophists were people were paid educators. And sometimes they taught real stuff, and sometimes they taught just how to win at an argument, whether you're right or not. So they were like proto professors, proto lawyers, proto rhetors. They taught rhetoric, and they taught rhetoric for a heavy sum to rich people's children who were going to become politicians. So that they taught the art of persuasion. And Socrates also teaches the art of persuasion, but he doesn't take money for it. So he believes that you're more able to like stick to your values if you don't take money for it. But then also you do rely on everybody feeding you and actually liking you. So, and he got lucky that way. Everybody liked him. Everybody fed him, got him drunk all the time. Like, we're begging him to hang out at their house and party and have these conversations. But he is hanging with the aristocracy.
Mm.
He's not hanging out with a bunch of poor people. And the person who is writing the dialogue is not poor. But he might have a little bad faith. Plato might have a little bad faith about his money, you know, but he is in a place to have enough leisure to contemplate what it is, how he has gotten the leisure to write these dialogues.
Kind of how art and culture still works to this day.
Yeah. Do you want to say more about that?
Or just that it does, I think, take a certain level of, well, availability of leisure, right, of time, of resources to be able to, and then I mean also like artists have needed, or philosophers, people need patrons throughout history, and that's kind of the situation, I guess, that Socrates is in, and sort of, yeah. So to me, it's very like contemporary in that way.
I mean, there's everything contemporary about, I mean, it's,
Yeah.
there are a few things that make it not contemporary in that there were city-states,
Right.
and the city-states had walls around them. That's like a lot different. It almost feels that like some of the differences are just so small compared to the similarities.
Yeah, even down to Thrasymachus, sorry, like this beach, which I mean, I know we're going to talk about, but
Oh yeah, we're gonna get there. It's I mean, we're almost there, right? Because we're just getting to the point where you're thinking about hell, you're thinking about what you owe people, what you don't owe people. And Cephalus is like, you know, and we're talking about money, and like if you need it to like feel this calm and feel like you've paid off all your debts. And you know, Socrates is like, well, did you make all your money or did you inherit your money? Right. And he already makes like, he's making this distinction between inherited wealth and being nouveau riche.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, well, people that earn all their money like are obsessed with earning money, where
Yep.
people that inherit wealth are just kind of like, they might even hate it. They're like, ugh, you know, I got to go to this museum fundraiser my dad gave this money to, and like if I don't show up, they're gonna be mad. But it came from us, and I guess I'm gonna do it. And also what is interesting is Polemarchus's answer to that, which we have, I know, this is what is a little intimately close for me, where anybody born of a baby boomer really knows this, is like one generation had a ton of money, the next generation squanders most of it because they don't do anything. They're like, sweet, I get bailed out of everything, I don't have to do shit. And then the third generation is like, oh my God, there was so much money and now I'm a little entitled prick and I don't have any money. So this, like, what have you given me? And so Polemarchus got a little of, well, Cephalus, and then it goes, Cephalus works a little bit, he gets some inherited wealth, works a little bit, and tries to make more then his dad left for him for his sons. So we don't know really what Polemarchus is up to in terms of like his career, how much he's going to have to work, but his dad is really looking out for it.
I
And-
felt like Cephalus is like, first of all, I acknowledge my privilege. And I know that like, because I have this wealth, it's like, it's easier for me to do the right things to have a good afterlife. But also I didn't just squander it. Like I built it and I used my privilege.
Yeah. And he is not completely nouveau riche either. He's like, I also have an adequate amount of family wealth that like, I understand the privilege that I have. And also I've seen somebody squander it. I know what
Yeah.
that looks like.
But
And
also he's a foreigner, like he's not a full citizen.
he's not a full citizen.
And his whole family is going to lose everything.
Yeah,
Polemarchus will be executed, as I think Bloom points out.
right.
And so it's really, there's this whole political subtext too to these guys who are very comfortable, talking about inherited wealth and building their wealth, but who will soon lose everything under the 30 tyrants. And so it
think-
adds a pathos to the discussion, especially
Right, good point.
Thrasymachus's his championing of tyranny.
Did the footnote say that like some of the people in the room are the 30 tyrants?
I think I don't
Yes.
I think
I
one of
thought
them,
it
what is the one whose name begins with an N?
Nicias or Niceratus.
Yeah, Niceratus might, or one of those two might be.
Yeah,
And
there's 11 people there. I mean,
yeah. And Lysias,
yeah,
Lysias is one of Cephalus's sons, though. He gets arrested. Lysias gets arrested, but doesn't get executed, is what I think Ari Allen says. Anyway, so I just thought that was, I had forgotten all that context.
the historical context is important for sure.
Yeah. 'Cause, I mean, it's been 25 years since I read this. So I was just reading it now. I didn't really think about that when I read it before. But reading it now just adds this whole dimension to
Right.
it.
The citizen foreigner subtext context is very important in that time. And I suppose as well as in our own time as well. Just this idea, I just can't stop thinking of narcissism of minor differences and how this is an analytic, a proto-analytic text as well for the way that in-groups and out-groups are formed. And this whole concept of friend and ally and what one owes to others, what one owes to oneself, and then like how systems of value get established, right? So the systems of value by which you're going to be like same, different. Same enough, different enough for now. How these it's also still fresh on the heels of Dune. That's kind of how we ended that conversation, was talking about how the way the power structures were allying and turning on one another, and how tenuous allyships can any allyship or friendship actually, it's that thing too where like nobody can burn you like a friend or like somebody you thought that you trusted, because then they're into the inner, and if we really want to go there, that is like also what spycraft is about getting in, being good at like making semblances so that people really feel trusted and they trust you with intimate secrets that can destroy them and larger things that are connected to them. And on the surfing note, that's like the whole conversation of this like secret spot stuff, blowing up spots and telling where the sandbars are good and who gets the information for, because ostensibly like you would rather share the info with people you want to surf with because you have similar value systems, right? Where like justice in that view ends up looking like, well, Thrasymachus's view, which is like being nice, this whole concept of being nice to your
Your
friends,
friends.
mean to your enemies.
Mhm.
And that's gonna definitely get complicated. So that right now it is, so Cephalus is like, I'm too tired. I'm gonna give this argument to my son. Like, he's gonna inherit there's a fun little play on words where he's like, now that we're talking about inheritance, my son is gonna inherit my part of the argument. So it starts off, really with Polemarchus doing the toe-to-toe dance with Socrates all the while. Like, I love this part, like they're having this conversation and Thrasymachus is like,
Being held back.
he's like, oh, you guys are so stupid. Oh, so this whole thing, evil deeds, all this stuff with the poets, and gives the argument to, and then they go on about Simonides. Simonides is the friends, isn't it? The friends give it Pindar says that. Where's the Simonides part? Cephalus. I was looking because he says Pindar too says, for a beautiful saying it is, Socrates, of the poet, that when a man lives out his days in justice and piety, sweet companion with him to cheer his heart and nurse his old age, accompanieth hope, who chiefly ruleth the changeful mind of mortals. That one is not Simonides though.
Simonides is at
Oh, here it is.
331E.
Right, Lege Day. To render each his due.
Yeah.
That's what Simonides says, to render each his due, which is like, great. Thanks, poets. So Socrates says, I must admit that it is not easy to disbelieve Simonides, for he is a wise and my translation says inspired, but the Greek is theos. So it could just,
Bloom says divine.
yeah, holy, divine. But just what he may mean by this, you, Polemarchus, doubtless know, but I do not. It is also not clear. Obviously, he does not mean that what we were just speaking of, this return of a deposit to anyone whatsoever, even if he asks it back when not in his right mind. I mean, this is so crazy that they're talking about weapons and giving weapons to insane people in the 4th century BC. Like, we're still having this problem here.
Yeah.
People.
Yeah.
So they didn't have guns yet, but apparently you didn't want crazy people to have crossbows either. It's like, and also, how do you determine?
But it was debatable.
But it's debatable.
Just like now.
Just like now.
Apparently.
It's still debatable. This is why, like, actually being in touch,
There's
I've never really lost touch with this text. It's always like had a mark on me. And when people have been hyperbolic, it's been therapeutic for me, this text, throughout coronavirus and the Trump presidency before it, because it felt, yes, our technology is new. The way we communicate is new. We're here on Zoom. The problems are not new. They're amplified by the technology, but the problems are the same. So instead of having long conversations about whether to take away your crazy friend's axe or his AK-47, it's the same conversation. And who gets to determine that that person is crazy? By what standard of mental health? And who has the right to say, I'm definitively sane and you're definitively crazy? And that these people are, you're right, these people do deserve to be, they are wrong. We sense they're wrong, but this is the issue that Socrates is also driving at. It's like, it's just not that easy.
Mhm.
Like, these are things that we need to think more and talk more about when we think we're so right. And this is also what has gone on with the reactive moves from the left, where it feels so right to fight for justice, and nobody is being cautious with their righteousness. And if Socrates is doing anything, he's asking people to slow down, which is a good, that really does put me on the side of Socrates, as annoying as he is and the way he goes around doing it. I mean, let's be also historically accurate. Socrates eventually pissed people off pretty fucking bad,
Right.
because he got sentenced to death. They finally stopped putting up with it. He ended up killing himself with the hemlock, but his run did not last forever. He eventually pissed off the whole entire city, and it turned against him. So we should bear that. He is annoying, but also really smart. And also just asking, and he is that gadfly that, causes the cow to constantly swish its tail. And that's, he wants the tail to keep swishing. Yeah.
This is maybe a stupid question, but like, what are we to make of like, this isn't actually Socrates, this is like Plato writing Socrates?
Oh, yeah.
Like, how are we meant to think about that? Are we just supposed to take it as it's Socrates, or?
No,
What do you think?
I don't
I mean,
think so.
I don't have any really context. This is my first dive into.
Well, what's
this.
interesting is how Socrates, I mean, the way Plato uses Socrates in different dialogues and the different personas that Socrates inhabits. And
I have a better
and-
question. How many dissertations are written on that question?
Oh God,
Okay.
it's endless. Yeah.
Well, I was like, I'm
Angela.
speaking very confidently about like Socrates, the real person, and this text, and so then I'm like, oh, are we just meant to take that leap of faith, or?
Socrates has a consistent character across Platonic dialogues,
Okay.
and being annoying and like flirty
Yeah.
is one of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, he has consistent, so as a literary character, that's like any literary character, we could even say that, let's even not suppose that he even ever existed as a historical figure. He's a well-developed literary character across Platonic dialogues.
Okay.
So if we want to think of him in that literary sense as literarily real, whether or not this is historically, this is all we have.
Okay.
So we have the literary Socrates as painted by Plato. There are probably so many dissertations in comp lit, classics, and philosophy on this topic.
Do we have anything published directly by Socrates, or we only know him through Plato?
He did not write.
Oh, okay.
There are other testimonies about Socrates. Herodotus talks about Socrates.
We know him through other people then.
We have reports in other
There's
ancient
sculpture.
texts.
There's sculpture as well. So there is enough evidence that these are real historical figures. And that Plato was Socrates' student, and that, like any let's even just think about the craft of writing. Like, there's nothing new. Like, nobody comes up with anything new. Like, they just use their own personal experience and extrapolate from that. And sometimes they're very literal. They just use the people, like John Steinbeck pissed off the whole entire town to Salinas. Because to the people who lived there, Steinbeck didn't cover over, like, he just basically told the town's secrets, and people were mad. And it's like why people don't want their mothers to read their memoirs, things like that. Like, even in fiction, like, it's parts of yourself, parts of people that you know, parts of experiences that you had. even, your imagination needs some material from the world to work with. So it was his, and it seems to me, at least my opinion would be that Plato liked Socrates, as a teacher, and he thought he was a really compelling figure to put at the center of his dialogues.
Mm.
And he must have been a kind of larger than life dude in Athens, especially to be put to death for being who he was and for not conforming in certain ways, but also for wielding like a lot of power. And also, for not like this argument that he's in a way like the most fit to rule, that the most fit to rule don't want to rule. It's like the catch-22, where it is a catch-22. I mean, that is what catch-22 is about as well. Like, you have to be crazy to get sent off the battleground.
Mhm.
If you want to get sent off the battleground, you're not crazy.
Yeah. It's a good book.
It is also a good book. Yeah, so I don't know. I think that's like a sufficient answer. Definitely, we could
That
suspend.
was more than I was expecting. Thank you.
We could definitely suspend disbelief and say he's literarily true.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
his.
And even within philosophy, there are whole schools of interpretation. I mean, the analytic philosophers who want to just extract the arguments and analyze whether they're sound and ignore the drama. And then there are others who really, like Bloom, or all of our translator.
In the
who's-
preface,
who-
he was
who's
like, the
who's
drama's
who's a
important.
Straussian. He's a Straussian, and so the Straussians focus on the dramatic character, but also on like the what's happening between the lines,
Mhm.
the implications. And so just epic wars of different philosophical tribes over this stuff.
Right, and also technically in the history of philosophy, the philosophers before Plato are classically called the pre-Socratics,
Hmm.
but Nietzsche calls them the pre-Platonic philosophers.
Hmm.
So to make that very point, so Nietzsche does take Nietzsche's like Socrates just an invention of Plato. And Socrates would have been more close to the pre-Socratic, what are known as the pre-Socratic, which Nietzsche calls the pre-Platonic philosophers. And for a really robust understanding of a lot of the issues and even the form of argumentation, you do need to have a deeper acquaintance with the earlier tradition of philosophy in ancient Greece, because especially in Plato, and one could argue that Plato plants like a lot of Pythagoreanism in Socrates. And that was kind of Nietzsche's complaint, was that Plato is planting his own proclivities in Socrates, where Socrates was maybe even more Socrates-like than Platonic. Like Socrates, I think also maybe one of Nietzsche's points, but don't quote me here, and maybe I have to go back to my pre-Platonic philosophers text by Nietzsche. But one of his points is that Socrates himself would not have argued for the forms.
Right.
That Socrates was more about this, the dialectic, and not about like arriving at formal knowledge. So that there, in a way, he was, so he wouldn't have done that. The forms are Platonic, and that's Plato inserting his philosophy into the mouthpiece of Socrates. So, and I think people do also read these dialogues in this way of like, that's Socrates, that's Plato. I actually, on this second read or second gazillionth, on reading this again, am way more into the drama part personally, because I've been reading a lot of sci-fi and a lot of dialogue and reading the philosophy between the, I mean, and if that's a work of Plato's, and this is Plato's philosophy, and looking at it more as Plato's philosophy of just showing this interchange, you know, in a way, then Plato has surpassed his master because he's able to show all these viewpoints. I mean, it's such a beautiful text for doing that. In that way, he's not espousing a philosophy, but showing philosophy in life, in lives, in vivo. So that's pretty cool. Like, I listened to this podcast called What's Left of Philosophy. And they make a really good point. One of these points that really stuck with me, I can't even remember if it was on Plato's Republic or on something else, and they brought up the Republic, but they were saying how all of these characters are in here doing something, right? They're all like, make everything that they say is true in the sense that it's coming from a person as their opinion. And those are real opinions that people hold in the world.
Yes.
You know, so I mean, that, and that even did give me, well, just hearing that gave me more compassion for Thrasymachus and all of the Thrasymachai of the world. So speaking of Thrasymachus, we should not tarry too much longer, but so we're on this issue though. We're already at, so with the Simonides owing each to what they're due, well, you have to know what an each is and what is due to what. So you're already at like, how do we establish a system of values?
Just like just to me that oh wait, am I frozen?
Nope.
No,
Oh, okay, sorry.
Listening. We all froze.
Yeah, I was like, it's just like such a central question around obviously like what is justice, but like what is punishment? And I think I was kind of unable to read this without constantly thinking about just like theories of punishment or like dealing with crime or like any sort of that context was big for me when just like starting with all those definitions of justice and seeing Socrates like break them down.
Well, I mean, you are in a field where there's a code.
Yeah.
You're like looking up like section 2.3565.a.b subsection 07.
Right.
It's like, in this case, you are defined as XYZ.
Correct.
And as XYZ, you are due A, B, C, D, E, F, G, except in the cases where Y is W and W is Z, then therefore you have now transformed your status to F.
A really good description of the legal fields.
It sounds very Kafkaesque.
That is, I mean, that's the complete accurate representation of the legal system too. And yeah, and I mean, often that what you just said, doesn't match people's, I mean, it's kind of like glommed onto people's realities, but it's
a superstructure of reality. Yeah. It's a meta structure of reality. And what they're also, so, I mean, there's a Platonic dialogue called the laws.
Right, I guess so.
And who gets to make them. And I mean, this whole issue of politics is who gets to make the laws, who gets to make these standards by which people are measured and defined as an XYZ, who is due ABC based upon, EFG actions.
Right.
And me, this is kind of being very analytic philosopher, just using those. I've adopted some of their terminology, but at the end of the day, I'm a continental philosopher. So, but to Roger's point earlier, like they will go into the actual moves of the argument that Socrates is doing. But the superstructure is really like that's why we're going to get to the cave later on, because the superstructure is how do we ground reality? It's the ultimate question. How do we agree upon terms? How do we agree that these deeds equal a good man in this context, and these deeds equal a bad man in this context? And like, is there a point when the good deeds and the bad deeds even out? How do you form a treaty or an allyship? What makes a friend? What binds you to a person so that you can trust them in every case? What makes you a trustworthy person? What makes you a person who honors their word, right? And they're going to ground some of this in metaphysics, well, that guy sacrifices to the gods every time. He doesn't come down to here and not like drop a flower down at the shrine or, give some animal fat. He doesn't run away with like God's barbecue meat. He like burns a certain amount of meat to the gods and then takes his own. So that is precisely the central set of questions is leading towards like how we agree upon terms,
Right.
which will really be taken up by Aristotle in a serious way when some of the first texts that he writes are on the categories, on how we categorize anything and say that this is an X or this is a Y, so that we can like, to use the Latin, understand, so that we can stand upon it, so that we can put it underneath us and feel that we've like conquered that bit of information. And this is, one of the, I guess, contemporary arguments about justice, and ancient arguments it would turn out to be, is that who is determining these standards, and who gets to have a say. And the political structure is going to, so they're going to come down, to the three main political structures: tyranny, oligarchy, and democracy. And the laws are going to look different, how they're written, who counts as what's owed to who, and then how the laws get written based upon that political structure is going to look different. And then to agree to get those political structures, well, then we have to deal with like really like base human desire and how that's constructed, how people organize in groups, and how people form these allyships and enemyships, and how they conduct warfare. And so, a long critique of like even reading ancient Greek philosophy is always like, there's no women. But this is the start of the patriarchy, and like engaging in this is engaging in, but we are coming from the deep future world of the patriarchy. So,
It's that thing how nothing changes.
but if you're gonna somebody, you make them your friend, right? You got to get deep on the inside. You got to, what is the word where you, it's not if you can't beat them, join them. We're not doing that. It's the,
We're
Keep
not,
your friends close and your enemies closer.
that, but isn't there a good one about like infiltrating from the inside?
Oh.
There must be. It'll come to us in 2 weeks. I don't know. I feel like there's one about like pretending to be the thing or into the thing just to infiltrate the thing,
so
to
then
like turn it on its head. And that's why anybody would get into, like any well-meaning person would get into the legal system or get into politics.
Yeah.
They always end up getting, not always, but like it's dangerous. There are corrupting forces in there. I mean, that is like always one of the lessons of history, is the corrupting power of power. It's definitely one of the central lessons of the Dune novels as well. It's like how you, once you have all of that power, like how you maintain it. And just to make a little bit of a point to like bring Dune in and why there aren't women in here, and since 3 of you are women, Dune turns out that like it's an increasingly matriarchal society. Ends up where this all-female order basically rules the universe, where two forces of femaleness are at war with one another. So it's literally lady hate at the end of the day. And like the central plot is these two cults of women vying for control of the universe. And throughout those sets of novels, the feminine characters develop in different ways. And I was texting Roger because it like struck me. I just finished the 5th book yesterday, and I'm on to the 6th book now. And I was like, oh my gosh, women in these series are always the only people that can save humanity and destroy it at the same time. And that's like always been the case. So that's so much power. And so male people and tribes throughout history have like known this power of women, and they like hide them away. They're like, no, you're too like, you're too volatile for the public sphere. We've got to hide you away. Like it's too much power. If we let this get out into the open, I mean, really, it's the all hell always breaks loose anyway. But I'm just saying, like, historically, women have been silenced and coverted, like put away, because people have been just so scared of that power, you know, and then they steal from it and take, you know, make the ideas their own ideas and things like that. But it's just an interesting thought, like that there aren't women, but there clearly are women in the society who like men are scared of, and they're scared of their own vulnerability as well, their female-like qualities that they have. They have this homosocial society where they play these different roles of activity and passivity with one another. That's just like an interesting side.
They have like the naked gyms and
Oh
like
yeah,
very sexual gyms and
yeah, the Eraminos and the Eraminoi, the lovers, the young lovers. And there is in the symposium, they make a strong distinction between a passive lover and an active lover, and like they have real social norms over not flipping that hierarchical order, where the active lover, the pursuer, must be the older male, and that it's contrary to the norms of the society for the younger male to go after the younger male, the older male, which is Alcibiades. That's Socrates' complaint against Alcibiades. Alcibiades is like, come on, sleep with me, Socrates. And Socrates is like, you would
not
know.
appropriate.
You would know if I wanted to sleep with you. And I would be the one to initiate that. You've got
It's
it.
not a hell yes, it's a no.
It's weird. You got it backwards. And Alcibiades is one of the most beautiful
Right.
men in beautiful, powerful men in Greek society at that time. So they do have rules, you know, about this relationship to age and everything too. But I'm just saying, I just want to say that because there aren't women in here, and they are obviously exerting force in society. And like the fact that any of these men could be there having this discussion in the first place, like they all have wives. So regardless of whether they participate in homosexual activities, they have a duty to society to have children. So that was also something that was really different in ancient Greek culture, was that like they didn't see that their homosexual activities like stopped them from their procreative straight activities. It was like, and then they also saw, which is clear in the symposium, that some guys are like really gay. And some guys are gay for social climbing reasons. And some guys are just really not that gay. And like, but regardless of where they are on the spectrum, they all must make children if they can make children. And it's like the same for women in the society. But obviously none of them would be born if they didn't have moms. And also the political concentration of the power and the wealth in the male figure is built on a society that suppresses women's power because it's scared of it. That was my main point. Was that like they can't have this conversation without suppressing female power. So that's like an unspoken, that has to be the case in order for them to hold court in this fashion. And that there will be a kind of feminist argument from Socrates, coming attraction, female guardians, it's a thing. But right now we're in the all male world of really trying to define some ineffable term like justice and rendering each to their due. And then for the analytic philosophers and anybody that really likes categories, we get into this thing of the techne and these skills and what the good of the skill is that, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, like you're not going to like learn to captain a boat without really being able to bring it to shore all the way. Like what use are you as a captain? Why would you captain a boat if you weren't at least trying to get to shore? And why would you be a doctor if you weren't at least trying to heal bodies? Like if you called yourself a doctor, you went to medical school and you literally never healed anybody ever. Socrates is not wrong. We could take him at face value. You would, there are places where you could take him at face value, right? That person you would call a bad doctor. And the Greek word for missing the mark, like literally the Greek word for getting it wrong is missing the mark. So literally like an archery metaphor. So if you knew somebody that was like, I love archery, it's my favorite thing to do. And you watch them, they go to an archery tournament, they don't even hit the fucking target once. Literally the arrow never hits the target. And you were like, whoa, you're really bad at this.
Am I surfing right now?
Yeah. I was just thinking that.
And you're like, so, and they're like, but I just love doing it. I just love pulling the bow and like watching the arrow fly. And you're not going to, so like that might be cool. You might be like, that's cool. Not gonna bet on you if there's like some gambling involved in this archery tournament, unless it's some, I don't know, one of those things where like you can make money off the loser, because I'm really sure you're gonna lose. In terms of like a competitive thing. So his point with these skills thing too is this sureness, right? This sureness that like you're gonna hit the mark, and that you're not gonna get in like, you wouldn't hire his point is also you wouldn't like hire a contractor that's known for all of his houses falling down. We try not to, I mean, not gonna get into Apple and iPhones right now, but planned obsolescence, it works pretty good. But then they would say, this is where the money-making art comes in, right? Where planned obsolescence is like, they're really good at making devices. They're also really good at making money. And Artie, we're getting to this issue of like, how do we value being good at a skill with money? And how can one be good at a skill and at making money? Where it seems that making money is its own particular art.
Yeah, and it feels like there's this like commentary on like bankers, like in the way that we understand them in present day as just like, well, even when the doctor is making money, like, do you want the moneymaker or the doctor? Like, you want the like in each case, they're like, this person is useless. You always want the person that's creating the core value, not the person that is like handling the exchange of value. And it feels like this little mini like criticism on bankers.
Right, but like, and there is that criticism early on with Cephalus where he's like, so you're saying your money is only good when it's not doing anything.
Yeah, yeah.
So you put it away because they're saying like you really have to trust the banker, right? Because that's a very, if you're existing in an economic system that has a currency for symbolic value like money, and you want to grow your wealth, it is important that what's the name of that guy oh man, what's the name? The guy that stole all that money.
Oh, what is his name?
There's a movie about him.
The pyramid scheme guy.
Yes.
Oh, Madoff?
Yeah.
Bernie Madoff, yeah.
Bernie Madoff. Like, you don't want to give your money to Madoff. right? Like that is a bad, like that's the worst case scenario, is like somebody's like, trust me with your money, I'm just stealing it. And you're trying to grow it, you're trying to have your money just grow itself and not like actually go back into the system and make other things. But also, I mean, Socrates' more communistic vision of like the money just always working and us exchanging value for like, you're good at this, I'm good at this, we can just all help each other, runs into problems when we start thinking about longer time, like about old age and future generations. And it would work if everybody worked that way all of the time, but he is kind of pushing not towards democracy, not towards all like, well, where Plato is going to push is towards a philosopher king, because he's going to be like pretty pessimistic about our ability to self-regulate and self-govern. Even though there is like a hopefulness to like, well, this would be great if we could just like, you just get good at building houses, I get good at making shoes, Roger gets good at polishing silverware or whatever, making silverware, and we all have and we're going to get into that and that's where this is going. It's going to get into the complication of specialization of skills and value and labor value. That's where this is going. When we think about this in the context of like a sport like surfing that's done recreationally, we're all sharing this one resource where like it's extra complicated because we're doing this like from the borders of cities and states and nation states and international travel and different levels of tribalism. You know, so like we're talking about laws and ways and cultures and ways of growing up and certain kinds of norms of doing things that each one from the land brings into the water. And then we have like the larger surfing international culture, which has these larger written, there's no code of laws. Like there are things like Sean Thompson has written the Surfers Code, and you know, there is the Hawaiian kind of general sense of aloha and etiquette. But as we know, it's not the case everywhere. And as I learned when I did that talk on crowds, like the money from the internet businesses, Silicon Valley, WeWork guy, Facebook guy is, you know, taking over the lineups, and some of the coach figures like myself in Hawaii are getting paid to show those kind of people around the lineup. And those people are using like their money to take the resources but they are paying local people, but not all the local people, just the one that knew how to position herself or himself in such a way that like they had a portal through which that they could be accessed by the wealthy person to access the resources. So we have like a lot of complications in legal structures and political structures that are worth just thinking about and disentangling. And that again goes to like this tying up of money with skill sets, where we all have skill sets that we all, you know, and it's crazy too that they don't have a full-blown capitalist system at this point, this way pre-industrial capitalism, but this idea of somehow also the skill being a little muddied by the fact that it has to be made, that money has to be made to do it, that we can't just do things out of enjoyment or for the love of the craft or for the love of the skill of being like good at doing the craft. Like there has to be some you got to eat. And you also rely on other people for other needs, because specializing means that it is more efficient to specialize, most of us know, and to rely on the specialties of other people and to come together and to share in our specializations. But let's just move briefly, because we should probably just do book one again next week and cover Thrasymachus' argument, because this is rich, so it's cool. We're like buying ourselves more time. And Thrasymachus is pissed off at like all of this skill thing and like being good in this way. And Socrates is already starting to point out nuances where, like, if you're like the best banker is going to be the best thief. Like anybody that knows the interworkings, like your capacity to be totally virtuous and good at something kind of heightens your power.
Yeah.
So it heightens your ability to be bad, but then what is bad? And bad comes down to harming others. And that's like, maybe that's just like an interesting place before we take up, we should just do this again, like next Monday or even later this week. Maybe we just do this again on Wednesday or Thursday or something and cover the second half of book 2 and really get into Thrasymachus's argument, because it's like already 9:08. I mean, I could go till 9:30, but it is, yeah, it's so rich. It's so fascinating that like all of the different twists and turns that even just in half of book 1, with all of the campy fun play stuff,
Yeah.
which is really good. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm for starting fresh with Thrasymachus in a new session, because it's such
That's
a
actually like
rich,
half the book. Yeah.
yeah, it's such a rich.
it's so rich. It's like, oh my gosh, just the argument, like, you fucking dummy. I could just take your toys away from you right now and run away.
Sick
And what?
burn.
What?
I was saying he has that sick burn of like, did you have a nurse? Because she hasn't, or whatever that.
Oh yeah, because she should wipe the snot off your nose.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, Thrasymachus is, he makes a really good point. He is a really, really, really valuable character on all of the levels, right? This keeps happening. And when we look like empirically, scientifically at tribalism and culture and human nature, what Thrasymachus is saying from an empirical standpoint seems to be more the case.
Yeah,
And
he's a legal positivist.
he's a legal positivist.
Yeah.
Explain that.
Well, he's just describing what law does. Law is a rule backed by a threat of violence. That's what the whole movement of legal positivism in the United States holds. I think we have a lawyer here; she could tell us better.
Well, if only law school had taught me legal philosophy, really anything related to the reality of the legal system, that would have been great. No, but I tend to agree, but I also, when I was reading it, I was very much like, yep. So, but I think that that's right. Although don't quote me on the legal positivism.
I mean, I think where it gets slippery and tricky is just the language of, right, in the Greek, it is a dualism, dikos and adikos.
Right.
And
I don't mean the injustice part, but the argument that law is the advantage of the stronger, and that the different regimes
right,
make laws that are conducive to their regimes.
right. And how do they come, I mean, we're going to get into that. How do they come to power? And
Yeah.
who gives them that? I mean,
and then he makes this kind of a Nietzschean, immoralist argument with the injustice.
Right. There is a way to see, actually, Nietzsche is aligned with Thrasymachus in more ways than one, for sure.
I mean, Nietzsche writes about Thrasymachus, as I recall.
I don't.
Doesn't he?
I have to find it. I mean, I'm sure we could Google Nietzsche.
Or then there's the Machiavelli.
Well, yeah, I think I actually had a question, because I think I was probably reading it too fast, or I just like, maybe it's like a comprehension. I think where I thought that he was, Thrasymachus was like stating the reality, and then it was almost, and then Socrates I thought was like more making like a normative argument. It was like, well, what should, and so I initially perceived like a disconnect between,
Socrates is making a normative argument.
and
Yeah.
I guess I didn't think that Thrasymachus was doing that initially, although then
Then he switches, he changes tack and makes a different argument.
so
I
I
mean,
guess
where they're on a different register is that the immortalist claim of Thrasymachus is that it doesn't have to line up logic. It doesn't have to make logical sense. And Socrates shows that his argument is logically weak 4 times in a row.
right.
Yeah,
Because the language that he's using betrays what he is observing in lived reality. And I don't think Thrasymachus is using, and I think Socrates knows this as well, which is why the conversation can go to where it goes, where at the end, Socrates is like, well, now I just don't even know what justice is at all. Like, I'm more confused now than ever,
Right.
because they do have a problem with terms, because it's not so Socrates ends up aligning justice with wisdom and goodness and doing the virtuous thing. So he aligns being just with a kind of virtue ethics and being like at the height of virtue ethics. And Thrasymachus is saying that it's virtuous to steal from people when you're the stronger, and that because stealing is unjust, the unjust person is the most just, which like linguistically, like that, and logically you're saying that something opposite of something is just that thing, and that does not hold
Right.
that does not hold logically. So Socrates, like from a purely like geometric point of view,
Yeah.
is correct, but that is not how the world works. So geometry, which is a fitting metaphor because we're going to get into forms, and geometry was very important for all of the ancient Greek philosophers. And it is also important for, like, it's also important to think about like how much math hold, how much numbers hold, how much reality is in the numbers, when the numbers themselves, as we know from all the studies we've done here in book club in quantum physics, like they're measurement tools. And once we fuck with the measure, once we measure, we have like altered the system. We've altered the system. We've done something to it that it doesn't. Things that seem stable to us, like numbers, hold only for the most part across certain cases, but there's always going to be an exception to them. And we see, like in our lived experiences, more exceptions that are really difficult to account for. And especially in these kinds of questions that are like the ultimate questions about like who's right and who's wrong and who deserves this and who deserves that, and how do we deal with the fact that like what our lived experiences is a radically difficult and unequal political system and world everywhere in varying degrees since the beginning of time. It's not anyway, we kind of got into Thrasymachus's argument a little bit, but I think we could get into more next time. For sure. Did you have fun, Wuju? So, you know, and I do this too, just to say, finishing off with our first book club reading from the Republic, I really, and I have brought in surfing metaphors carefully, because the thing I do want to take away from Socrates is pausing when we think we're so right, you know, or so wrong. You know, I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that like in any case you were so right or you're so wrong. And I think like maybe something I want to start talking about is how Socrates deals with this belligerent Thrasymachus, because it is it's just interesting the way to think of conflict and the way that conflict is dealt with in this situation. Conflict, we don't like, you know, most people don't like it. And then it's really weird when like some people like really like it, but we like a little of it. We have like different styles of liking conflict. You know, like anybody trying surfing likes conflict a little bit, even within yourself, of like, This is so fucking hard.
I just feel like I'm like indifferent to conflict. Like I don't want it, but like other people will perceive conflict and be like, oh, it's so uncomfortable. And I'm like, oh, is it? Everyone was just saying what they thought. That's
Wow.
fine.
That's, I admire that.
Well, yeah, we'll get into that next time. Yeah, I think that's like a good focus too. And then you can infinitely meditate on that. So whether it's Wednesday or another,
Wednesday I can't do, just.
then
so
let's
you
just do a week from today. And then we'll just do Monday.
know. All right.
Because I'm not gonna want to do Thursday or Friday since there will be surf and I'll be exhausted.
All
Can't
right.
do Thursday either.
There. Let's go. Let's aim for Monday.
All right.
All right, guys, that was awesome.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Thanks,
Nice
Dan.
meeting